Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vicente Loftmet, and I am the Digital Marketing Manager for BenQ in Central and Eastern Europe. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to today's night sky photography webinar with Samuel Scicluna. Samuel and I have been working on this webinar for quite some time, and we're really excited at the turnout. If you can believe it, we're at over 820 registrations for today. Just a fantastic turnout, and we're so thrilled to receive all of you here today and with this fantastic opportunity that we have with Samuel today. I can really tell you that Samuel's put so much love and so much effort and so much care into really making the best webinar for all of you today. And we really think it's going to be a fantastic learning experience for all of you. Before we begin, I want to go over a couple of key details. So first of all, the webinar will be recorded and will be sent to you tomorrow in an email. So 24 hours later, you'll be receiving a recording of today's full webinar. So if you forget to take notes of something today, don't worry, you'll get the recording tomorrow. And the second point is that for all the participants today, you will be receiving a small gift from BenQ, which is a 10% discount code on the AccuColor monitors, which is the PD and the SW monitors. There are codes set up for Europe and then also specifically from Malta, where of course Samuel is also from. A note on the AccuColor monitors themselves, for those of you who don't know, BenQ has a line of monitors made for designers and for photographers, PD for designers and SW for photographers. These monitors are built from the ground up to be used by professional artists, by designers and photographers. The most important feature that they have is the fact that they have very color accurate screens. The monitors have been built in with this technology that BenQ calls AccuColor technology. And this ensures that the monitors that you're using, that the colors that you're seeing on your screen are the most accurate possible out of the box. If you've ever worked before with artistry on a digital sense, you're editing photos or you're editing or you're designing something perhaps, you'll notice sometimes it can be a bit difficult to get uniform colors. If you're looking at one screen, looking at another screen, when you print out your photos or your designs, they look different than how you imagined. AccuColor technology ensures that you are getting the most accurate colors possible. Beyond that, they come with a host of different features, really built for designers and for photographers in mind. They can be pivoted to go into the portrait mode if you are someone who works more with portrait photography. We've had some webinars in the past of professional portrait photographers who work really only with portrait photography, for whom that is very important. The photography monitors come with a shading hood and also are, as well as the design monitors, are all matte coated, ensuring that you get no light reflection when you are working, whether it's in the daytime or in the nighttime. My personal favorite feature is the hotkey puck, which is a small little remote control with which you can change different color modes while you're working, as well as switch between the different settings that you have set up. And we have really a great pleasure here in our webinars and here in the audience that we receive, because we don't receive just professional designers and photographers, but we also receive people who are just starting off in their journey with design or photography. Wherever you are in your journey, whether you're just starting off, whether this is just a hobby for you, or you're someone like Samuel who really does this as a profession, as their vocation, there is a monitor for you. Whichever size you're looking for, whichever resolution you're looking for, there is a monitor in your budget range. And the good news is that no matter which you choose, this same AccuColor technology is built into each and every single one. And moving on to Samuel himself, Samuel has been using the SW series since 2019, and I encourage you to check out his review on that as well. And I also encourage you to not take my word for it for what I'm telling you here tonight. We have a great pleasure to be working with a lot of fantastic artists like Samuel. I myself work with artists from 10 to 15 different countries here in Europe, and I've had the pleasure of working with a variety of just incredible profiles. And each and every single review that you see online for a BenQ product, and I can say specifically now for the AccuColor lineup, there's no scripts being sent. There's no us telling them what to say during the review. This is really an exchange of the company wanting to really get the feedback from these artists who work with this professionally to see what their honest feedback is. And so I encourage you to check out reviews, not just from Samuel's, but really from all over Europe to see for yourself and to make up your own mind with that. And onto Samuel's profile. For those of you who don't know, Samuel is a landscape photographer from Malta, and he has an incredible portfolio. I really encourage you to check it out because it's just quite captivating, the different types of images he has. We're today speaking about nightscape photography, night sky photography, but Samuel has an incredible ability to take photos of really any landscape you can imagine, whether it's something with storm chasing, with natural phenomenon, with lightning striking from the skies, or whether it's taking pictures of barren landscapes, mountain landscapes, areas that are very cold with ice. It's wherever he goes, he always manages to take just incredible photos. And I think one of the amazing things about today's webinar too is that you're not going to just get the creative side of that, just to understand how he captures these from a creative standpoint, but also from a technical standpoint. And I think one part which will be particularly engaging for all of you is that there is also going to be an editing portion where Samuel will be doing some live editing and really show you his process of how he goes from A to Z with his photography. And finally, the last thing that I'll note is that there will be a Q&A section. No doubt you'll have a lot of questions for Samuel. That will be at the very end of the webinar. You are, of course, free to ask questions now, but just know that we will be getting to the questions at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I would like to now call Samuel and we can start the webinar.
Hi, Vicente. Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you. I think everyone is very, very excited. So have a good webinar, everyone.
Brilliant. So first of all, thank you once again for the opportunity, Vicente, and obviously thank you, BenQ, for organizing this webinar. I'm really, really happy to be here and be able to talk to all of you today. So thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to come and hear me talk about some of my work. Hopefully it inspires you to shoot some night images of your own, or if you already do shoot night images, hopefully you can relate to some of the stories and adventures that we go through to capture these images. So yeah, I'll just run through quickly what the contents of the webinar are going to be. First of all, I'll just do a quick introduction about myself. I'll talk about planning in night photography, which, just like landscape photography, is extremely important, making sure you're at the right place at the right time. Equipment, what equipment I use, what equipment is necessary, any special equipment, and I'll talk about a tracker, which is something I use to capture night sky images. The techniques that are used to capture these images. So obviously different types of images require different types of techniques. Then we look specifically at the Milky Way, what I like to call starscapes, star trails, the moon, comets and meteors, and finally the northern lights. And at the end, there'll be a Q&A session, as Vicente has explained. So a little bit about me. First of all, yes, this webinar is completely about night sky photography, but I don't just shoot the night sky. So as you can see here, I shoot landscapes, severe weather when I get to see it. And I have traveled to quite a few places to be able to capture these amazing images. As you can see, a lot of my work involves color, and having a monitor which can accurately display the colors is absolutely critical to making sure that my photo, first of all, the photos are what I envision them to be. So when I've captured that image on location and I've seen those colors, I want to make sure that any reproduction of those colors is accurate and true to what I saw. But also when it comes to printing my work, before I use a monitor designed specifically for photography, which is the BenQ SW270C, I used a generic monitor, and the number of times my prints didn't look anything like they did on the screen is unbelievable. So it really does make a difference, and it is really important that, especially working with color, that you've got the right equipment. It's all part of the equipment you need if you're taking photography seriously. So I'll just ask a quick question here. So this webinar is interactive, and we do have polls, which are basically questions that I'll be asking to you guys, the audience. And I'll appreciate, obviously, if you answer, and I can share the results after that. So just to get an understanding of kind of the people we have so far in the audience. I'm going to put this poll on the screen, and the question is, at what level are you with photography at this point in time? There are 4 options, whether you're professional, hobby, just starting, or you haven't even started yet, but you're just curious about photography. So I'm going to open up this poll now. I'll leave it open for 30 seconds, and if you can just please respond. Okay, brilliant. I'm going to close the poll now. I'm just going to share the results with you. So it looks like we've got quite an interesting mix. So 10% of the people here are professional photographers. The vast majority are just hobbyists, and quite a few just starting out, and a couple who clearly are curious to get into photography. What I'd say to those people is definitely stick with it. Photography is an incredible art form, an incredible genre. There are so many different types of photography, obviously, that you can get involved with, but definitely stick with it because it's an incredible art form to explore. Awesome. So I'm just going to get started and talk a bit about planning now. So this is an example of planning a moonshot. The app I use here is called PhotoPills. It's one of the best apps I've found in terms of being able to plan for sunrise, sunset, moonrise, moonset, the Milky Way itself. It even has a feature for meteor showers, which is really handy when you're trying to figure out which part of the sky you're going to see meteors in. So definitely a fantastic app to have, very easy to use. And what I've done here is basically on the 31st of January 2018, I knew a supermoon would be rising. I wanted to find a location where I could include the moon with the skyline of Valletta. This is Malta's capital city, the island I live in. And I wanted to get a shot of the moon rising in tandem with Valletta. Obviously, I've captured this at blue hour, as you can see, so the sun has already set, the lights in the city are up, and the warm colors of the moon just rising match perfectly with the warm tones of the incandescent lights. This is an example of a moonset in Tuscany. So this is a workshop I was running in Tuscany in 2019. I'd planned this shot months in advance. As you can see from the app here, you drop the pin as where you need to be, and the blue line is where the moon is going to be at a specific time. So you can see you put in the date and the time, 20th of March at 6:11 a.m. This was just before sunrise, and you then know where you need to be to get the shot. A couple of other examples, these are using the Milky Way. So I've dropped the pin at where I wanted to stand to bring this watchtower as my foreground, and I could see that the Milky Way would be overhead, arching above the tower, and plan that shot so I could go and capture it. Same with this one. This is a bit further from home. This is in the Dolomites, the famous Tre Cime de Lavaredo. Again, I knew what time when I was going to be traveling. I made sure I traveled when there was a new moon so that I could actually get the best sky possible. There'd be no light from the moon. And again, plan the shot to make sure that the Milky Way lines up with these peaks. This is a shot from Malta, from Blata del Melch. Same thing, early in the season. I wanted to get the rising Milky Way. So as you can see, the Milky Way is almost, well, not almost horizontal, but about 45 degrees of elevation. If you compare it to this image where the Milky Way is almost vertical, that's later in the year, it's in August. But in the Northern Hemisphere, in April and May, you can capture the rising Milky Way. So this was captured at midnight. I dropped my pin to where I'd want to stand, and I wanted to see where the Milky Way would be, and I could see it was going to be rising over these boulders. Probably one of my favorite shots. This is also the front shot of the webinar. These natural sea caves are in the west of Malta. Quite a trek to get to, so they're not frequently visited, but around June, early in the night, you can capture the Milky Way rising over these sea caves. The whole area is obviously almost in the sea, so you can only go there when it's flat, calm. Otherwise, you risk being washed away because there isn't really anywhere to go. The whole coastline is this low-lying rock. Another example of planning here, capturing the Milky Way. The core of the Milky Way is hidden behind this boulder, which I wasn't too happy with at first, but then ultimately I realized that although the core of the Milky Way isn't there, I prefer the subject to it. I love the foreground, the detail in the rock. I've posed there as a selfie for myself, and this rock itself from the side looks like a shark's fin. So even though it doesn't show the full core of the Milky Way, it still shows kind of gives an idea of a night scene, and I feel has quite a dreamy feel to it. This is a meteor shower. This is this summer, and this is how you can use PhotoPills to plan. You can choose the meteor shower you want to check. So I wanted to shoot the Perseids meteor shower, and it shows you the best dates to shoot it from the 17th to the 24th of August this year. Peak is on the 13th of August, and this is actually the night of the 12th to the morning of the 13th of August. We were in this location. It was an incredible place to get to. It took us about 5 hours to hike. This is my partner and myself I'm referring to. We covered 950 meters of elevation and 10 kilometers to get to this location. Shot through the night. Was really lucky that I got some incredible fireballs, perfectly clear sky. You can see Andromeda Galaxy here, and you can see the light pollution below us. So being up in the mountains can be quite an advantage because generally the light pollution is below you. So that's just different examples of planning. Moving on to equipment. So I mentioned earlier that.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have a couple of people asking again to hear the name of the app that you were just describing.
The app is called PhotoPills. So photo and then pills, Pills.
PhotoPills.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
No problem. So this is going on to equipment now. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the pieces of equipment I use is called a star tracker, and the reason you use a star tracker is basically the limiting factor with night photography. If you've ever tried to capture the sky at night, is the rotation of the Earth causes the stars to trail if you use a long shutter speed. So what this does, the tracker, is effectively once it's lined up in the northern hemisphere to Polaris, the North Star, it basically rotates the camera at the same speed that the Earth is rotating, but the opposite direction. So effectively, it's canceling out the Earth's rotation and keeping the camera in the exact same place. And that enables you to get much longer shutter speeds. And longer shutter speeds then means you can use lower ISO. So you're going to get a cleaner image, a cleaner final result. And just to give you an example, generally I shoot the Milky Way at ISO 6400 if I'm not tracking, with a 20-second shutter speed. If I'm tracking, I can go for 4 or 6 minutes in terms of shutter speed and drop my ISO down to 400 or 800. So there's a significant difference there in the result, the quality of the image. Over the years, I've gathered a lot of gear, more than I'd care to admit, I think. But the reality is you don't need all of this gear, right? So for night photography, the basic things you need are definitely a sturdy tripod, obviously a camera and a lens. A lens with a wide aperture is ideal. So anything that is f1.4, f1.8, f2.8, those lenses are going to be ideal because they let in more light. And once again, just explaining that the limiting factor is going to be shutter speed. So the more light you can let in, you can use a shorter shutter speed and avoid star trails. I've got trackers here as well. So yes, there's a lot of equipment here, but the real basics are, you can get away with a camera, lens and tripod only. Then there are other things which make life easier. So stuff like, for example, a dew heater to keep the lens warm. If you're shooting for many hours overnight, you don't want the lens to fog up. So a dew heater can make a big difference there. Obviously different lenses for different types of photography. So generally with the Milky Way, I'm shooting wide angles, anything from 14mm on a full frame to around 24 maximum. So with those sort of focal lengths, I'm limited to At 14, I shoot about 20 seconds. At 24, I shoot for about 10 seconds. That's if I'm not tracking. Obviously, if I'm in a place where I can use the tracker, then I'm able to get a much longer shutter speed. And the tracker basically just needs to be set up by, if you can see the North Star, which is Polaris, then you'd be able to align the tracker to it. And once it's aligned, the tracker is basically on the same axis as the Earth's rotation. So it's going to be rotating on the same axis, effectively cancelling out the rotation. Obviously, there are other things which are good to have. If you want to do panoramas, then a panoramic head is very helpful. Head torches are obviously a necessity when you're out shooting at night. A decent camera bag, obviously, to be able to carry all the gear and keep it safe. But in reality, to keep things simple, the basics are a camera, a lens, and a tripod. Those are the things you need. Obviously, nowadays, I hope everyone is shooting RAW. Capturing the image on your camera is just the first step. Most of the work is done in post-processing, and that's why it's extremely important to have a monitor which can actually represent color accurately, represent brightness and contrast accurately as well. The SW270C, the BenQ monitor which I'm using, has a wide color gamut, so it covers 99% of the Adobe RGB color space and 100% sRGB. So it really makes sure that your colors are going to be accurate. With a monitor which doesn't cover that sort of gamut, you might be seeing it on screen, you might be seeing a color on screen and think it's accurate, but when you come to print it, it doesn't turn out to be accurate at all. These monitors are also IPS. They have IPS technology, which means that if you look at it from a different angle, it doesn't distort the color or the brightness. I'm sure we'll all remember laptops until recently weren't ideal unless you could look directly at the screen because of this, because the colors and the contrast would change so significantly. One thing BenQ is really focused on is color and brightness uniformity as well. So it's really important to make sure that the brightness across the screen is the same as is the color, because if you're working with so much color and half of the screen shows a slightly different color than it should be doing, again, once you go to print, you're going to have a significant issue there. Yeah, this is the hotkey puck, which Vicente mentioned earlier. It's a fantastic little tool. It comes with the monitor and it allows you to set up the monitor in a much more intuitive way. You've got buttons on it and a rotating dial, so you can just scroll through the menu much easier than you can. And you can also set some favorites on there of things you want to do. So for example, the monitors have the ability to show two color gamuts at the same time. So you could see the screen split down the middle with sRGB or Adobe RGB on the other side, for example. And that's all stuff you can access through the hotkey puck, which is fantastic. I'm going to open up another poll now, which is to kind of understand from the audience what you currently use for photo editing. So just give me 2 seconds while I load that up. And I'm going to put that poll on screen now. I'd appreciate if you can just respond. So the options are going to be a professional monitor, a non-photography specific monitor, a laptop, a tablet, or a cell phone. So I'm just going to launch that poll for you now. Okay, brilliant. So I'm just going to close that poll and share the results. So quite a few people are already using a professional monitor. That's really good to see. Majority are using non-photography monitor or a laptop. A couple of people use tablets or cell phones, but looks like the majority definitely falls on a non-photography monitor or laptop. And that's quite interesting there. Like Vicente mentioned earlier, BenQ does have a full range of different monitors, even different sizes, and obviously with the different size comes a different budget as well. So definitely something I'd recommend looking into if you're looking to take your photography more seriously or improve your workflow overall, because having the right equipment will make a huge difference when it comes to doing this work professionally and needing to make sure that everything you do is accurate and spot on. So I'm just going to hide those results and move on. So this is explaining the setup of the star tracker a bit more. So we'll start from the bottom. This is an equatorial wedge, which is basically used to get the tracker to be at the right angle or of altitude pointing towards the North Star in the Northern Hemisphere. There's a laser pointer, which helps to quickly find Polaris visually by using the laser. So like I showed in the image earlier, the laser, you use that to point towards the star, and then you'd use this polar scope to accurately align to that star. This is the tracker itself, this little box. There's a mount there to keep the camera level, a ball head just so you're able to move the camera around, camera, and the dew heater on there to keep the lens from fogging up. This year I moved over to mirrorless. So I previously used to use a Nikon D810 full frame camera, and now I've invested in the Nikon Z6 II and the Nikon Z7 II and the 14-24 lens, which have been absolutely fantastic. So speaking of cameras and lenses here, I'm just going to open up another poll, which is just to get an understanding of what are your favorite lenses for night sky photography? Those of you who've shot night sky photography so far, do you tend to prefer a prime lens or a zoom lens? I'm just going to open up that poll now. Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to close that and show the results. So it's actually quite interesting, quite a almost even Stevens there, where 54% use a prime lens, 46% use a zoom lens. Obviously, primes have the advantage of being lighter and generally smaller, especially at wider focal lengths. Obviously, a zoom lens has the convenience of being able to choose whatever focal length you want, but quite interesting to see it's pretty even there. I tend to use, previously I tended to use prime lenses more. However, the new Nikon 14-24mm lens is just incredible. So I'm tending to use that quite a bit at the moment, but really interesting to see that. So thank you for participating in that poll. So just to move on, like I mentioned, the monitor is extremely important part of the workflow. I often use a tablet as well, a graphics tablet, when editing. It does help to, especially because it's pressure sensitive, it really helps in terms of when using brushes, for example, in Photoshop, you can control the opacity of the brush by depending on how much pressure you put on the pad. So definitely something interesting, but this is definitely what I would consider one of the most important parts of my workflow, because capturing the image on camera is the first half, but post-processing is extremely important. And if you're not going to get the maximum out of the image, then it's not the best investment of your time. So I definitely recommend it. This is the hood, which Vicente mentioned earlier. I believe it was in the videos as well. It's really good at blocking out any stray light, so you don't get reflections off the screen. The screen is a matte screen as well, so it kind of helps to reduce any reflections. So really, they've done everything they can to make sure that when you're editing on one of these monitors, you're properly in the zone and seeing exactly what you need to be seeing. And as Vicente mentioned earlier, anybody who's attended today will be able to avail themselves of these discounts. So there's the different QR codes. You just need to scan them, which will take you to the relevant websites. Just to mention a couple of other things around the monitor. The monitor does actually have an option to go into a black and white mode. So anyone who shoots in black and white can find that particularly interesting or useful, because it gives you a very clear indication of what it looks like. And the monitor also has an SD card reader built into it. So that can definitely be an interesting point for some others. Going to move over to techniques now. and talk about how I capture some of my shots. So this is obviously a shot of the Milky Way. This is a tracked image. I'll go into more detail around what the difference between tracking and stacking is. So if we look at these two photos, this is a tracked shot. It's 4 minutes at ISO 800 and f4. And this is a single shot, 10 seconds at ISO 6400 and f2.8. So I'm compensating for the low ISO by having a long shutter speed here. Now, I'm not sure if you can tell already, there's clearly a difference when you're not even zoomed into the image, but once you zoom into the image, you can really see the difference in quality. So this is the same tracked shot. You can see how clean the result is. And this is a single shot at ISO 6400. You can see there's a lot of grain and noise. These were shot right after each other, like literally side by side, to make sure that obviously this is an accurate test. But as you can see, there's much more detail here. This is one of the nebulas in the core of the Milky Way, and you can see the glow, the color around it, whereas with a single shot, you don't really get that much detail. Also, the dust lanes are much more pronounced in the tracked shot than they are in the fixed shot. So to talk a bit more about tracking, this is a tracked image, like I explained. So this is a 6-minute exposure, and so this is the same image but zoomed in quite significantly, as you can see. Where I've zoomed in is the Royo Fuki area with the star Antares, and also around the core of the Milky Way. So as you can see, really clean results. You get the glow of the nebulae, and you get the different colored gases around the stars as well to show when you're tracking. This is an extreme close-up of the nebulae as well. So we've got the Lagoon and Trifid nebulae in the core of the Milky Way. This is obviously a massive crop of the image just to show you the detail, though. It's the same image, but just zoomed into that part. Stacking is the other way to overcome the issue with noise. So a single image at ISO 6400 will have a lot of noise, as we've seen. One way around that is to take multiple images in sequence with the exact same settings, and in post-processing, by stacking these images together, you're going to basically get an average out of that photo. So what I mean by average is, in this case, for example, there are 16 different shots here, each one shot right in sequence, one after the other. The first thing you need to do in post-processing is to align the images, because obviously the Milky Way is going to move across the sky because of the Earth's rotation. And once you've aligned them, Photoshop or any other software which can do stacking will then basically take an average of the 16 images and give you one final result. And what that does is, because noise is random in the images, it's not in a fixed point. In each frame, the noise will be on different pixels. So by taking 16 of them, or 20, or however many you want to take, by taking an average, if there was noise in this photo and in a particular pixel, it's likely not going to be there on any of the other 15 images. And therefore, when you take an average, you still get a relatively clean result. In terms of stacking, I usually shoot 10 or 20 images depending on the location, how much time I have, whether I have other compositions planned, which will mean I don't have much time to shoot more. So I'll make a decision based on that. But whenever I have the opportunity, I prefer to track, because I feel the result is definitely much cleaner. So advantages of tracking: better single image quality, making post-processing much simpler and a quicker process, more detail in the Milky Way dust lanes and nebulae, less noise throughout the frame, more glow from nebulae captured due to the longer exposure. It's cheaper than buying a lens, which would be used solely for astrophotography. And the advantages of stacking are: it's quicker to capture the sequence of shots required due to not needing to spend the time setting up and aligning the tracker. The ability to shoot in tight locations, such as a cave where Polaris is not visible. Now, there is a workaround for using a tracker in places where the North Star isn't visible in the Northern Hemisphere. It's called rough alignment, and basically you use a compass to kind of point north, or a phone to point north, and then you'd use based on your position, your you'd set the altitude on the tracker on the mount to your location. It's rough alignment, it's not accurate, but maybe instead of getting a 4 or 6 minute exposure, you can get, for example, a 1 minute exposure. And that 1 minute exposure at a lower ISO is still going to give a cleaner result than using ISO 6400. Obviously, the advantage of stacking is there's no need to carry a tracker with you, helping reduce weight and save space in your camera bag. I want to talk about exposure blending. So this is the post-processing part. So all of my images are multiple frames blended together to give a final image. I don't shoot a single frame for the image. The reason is that different parts of the image require different settings to be ideal. So for example, if shooting the sky here, this is a single exposure. If shooting the sky here, the ideal exposure is 20 seconds at 6400. At those settings, the foreground is clearly very dark and there's going to be a lot of noise in it. So I'll shoot a separate frame for the foreground where I'm not interested in the sky or the stars. I've focused on the foreground to make sure it's sharp, and I'll shoot, for example, 4 minute exposure for the foreground. And then in post-processing, I amalgamate the two photos together. I blend them together to give the final result. And these are just other examples of the same process. So this is a tracked image, and you can tell that because the foreground is slightly blurred because of the movement of the tracker. So this is my sky image, 4 minute sky image. This is a 4 minute foreground image. The foreground is nice and sharp. The stars are blurred because of the Earth's rotation. And the final image is that foreground and sky matched together. Same thing here. A sky shot, a foreground shot, and the final image. This is a bit more complex. So a frame for the sky, a frame for the foreground, a frame with me posing for a selfie, and then the final image of them all matched together. So you can tell the foreground image is used here, the sky image is used here, and obviously the selfie is included there. And just one last example. Sky image, so this is shot specifically for the sky. This is shot for the foreground. You can see the stars are trailing because of the long exposure. This is the shot for a friend of mine posing, and the final image with all of them put together. At this stage, before I go into night photography, I just wanted to open up another poll and ask around kind of what your favorite type of night sky photography is. So I've included 5 potential types there. There may be others which you think of, but I've tried to include all of what I could do, which is the Milky Way, star trails, starscapes, the moon, and the northern lights. So I'm just going to launch this poll for you now. If you could answer that, it'd be appreciated. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. I've closed the poll. There's clearly a very clear winner, so I'll just share the results with you now. So Milky Way, 56%. Seems like the majority love shooting the Milky Way. It's an incredible subject, to be honest. There's so much interest. There's the different colors, the different parts of the Milky Way that are visible from different places. The moon is second, and then a very close third with both Starscapes and the Northern Lights, and Star Trails being the least favorite there. Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So I'll just move into the Milky Way now. Seeing as it's the most favorite, or the most the subject people love most. So this is a shot from the Dolomites in Italy. Extremely lucky with the conditions. So 5 minutes after this was shot, these clouds were on top of us and we could see absolutely nothing. We couldn't even figure out how we're going to hike the 45 minutes back to our refugio, but super lucky with the conditions. Like I said, this low cloud just below us, the peaks of the Cardini di Misurina are peeking out, and then the magnificence of the Milky Way behind it. This is the shot which is on the front cover of this webinar, again from Maria, which is Mary's Cave in the northwest of Malta. Again, these shots are all a combination of multiple frames. It's not a single image. Another one of my favorite shots from last year. This is a cave in the southwest of Malta. This was the rising Milky Way, so I shot this in March. Unfortunately, it meant getting up at 2 a.m., getting out of the house at 2:30, and being on location at 3 to shoot this just before sunrise. But a really cool location to visit. This cave is used by climbers. You can see the quick draws hanging from the ceiling here. There are a couple of interesting routes, but definitely a cool place to visit. This is just a study of the Milky Way with the tracker. This is an 8-minute exposure to get as much detail as possible. And this is my favorite boulder at a place west of Malta called Il Blata tal Melch, which basically is a place full of salt pans. Again, separate sky image, separate foreground for a clean result, and a quick shot of myself climbing up to pose. I've also included myself in the image to show just how massive these boulders are. You know, without the person there, you'd think this might be maybe 2 or 3 feet high, but in reality, it's probably more like 10 or 12 feet high. I love using my tent, as you can probably see from other images, as a subject. Kind of helps to tell the story of being out at night, capturing the night sky. This is in the west of Malta along the cliffs. There's a tiny island here called Filfla, and the core of the Milky Way up in the sky. This is at Blata tal Melch also. Again, just wanted to show the scale of these boulders, so I included myself there. I use an artificial light to kind of create a bit more interest and really bring out the texture. With just the natural soft light, you don't really get to see the textures of these rocks, but using an artificial source of light has really helped to bring that out, and the Milky Way rising above. Another shot from Blata tal Melch. As you can see, this is probably one of the places I visit most because it's one of the few places that has really dark skies here in Malta. So again, a shot for the foreground, a shot where I went up to pose on the cliff, and then a shot of the night sky, and there's some ships on the horizon there just sailing through. The shot of the Milky Way over Tre Cime di Lavaredo in the Dolomites. This was the first time I visited the Dolomites, and we were there for 3 days, and for 2 days and 3/4 it was cloudy, but we got an hour's chance to shoot the Milky Way in the night once it cleared up, before the clouds rolled in again. There were still some clouds down here, which is why you can see these lines, but most of the sky was clear. I managed to capture this shot. This is the shot I mentioned earlier as well with Shark Fin Rock. Again, different technique used here. This is a focus stack of 4 images just to get everything in focus. This rock over my head isn't in focus, as you can see, just because it was too close for the lens to even focus. So there are different techniques which can be used. Focus stacking is one of them. The more frames you take, focusing at different points, the more you can get, more parts of the image can be sharp. This is in my Austral Park. Again, a selfie with the Milky Way and a large boulder which just happens to sit there. Makes it very interesting. This is also at my Austral Park as well. Again, just adding a sense of scale. These boulders are absolutely massive, the size of apartment blocks. And without that person there, again, you wouldn't really know how big these boulders are. Same image as I showed earlier when talking about post-processing and blending images. As you can see, this is the final result. This is a shot from this year, from Amir. I've always noticed these boulders when hiking there for sunset, but never thought about shooting them at night. So I was glad I made the decision to go and shoot them at night. Clear night here, nice detail in the Milky Way. Again, I've just gone posing the image just to kind of light it up artificially and add some interest, but also has a sense of scale. This is the same location, just a bit further down the coast. Again, using artificial light to light up the foreground and capturing the Milky Way right between the 2 boulders. This is another one from my style I showed earlier in terms of multiple shots. So you've got the foreground frame and the Milky Way frame. and this one as well. Just wanted to show it full screen so you could see all of the details. This rock is definitely a scary one to climb on top of just because it's so high, and obviously the sea was really rough down below. This is probably the location which is my nemesis. I discovered this location this year. I've been there 5 times and never got a completely clear sky. I've chosen to use this image anyway just because there was a slight break in the clouds and we managed to capture the Milky Way there. It's really interesting. The location is called Il Munar, which is basically in English the beak, like a bird's beak, because of the shape of the rock. But definitely something I'll have to revisit to make sure I get a good shot of in future. Again, this is the shot I showed you earlier, and you can see how sharp the foreground is because I specifically focused on the foreground separately to the sky. And another place next to Blat Al Melch where there's this really interesting weathered limestone formation. Again, just to show how tall these side walls are, I just wanted to into the shot. This is a cave in the south of Malta, next to Arlapsi. Again, there's that little island, Filfla, out to sea, and the core of the Milky Way above. This is the same night that I shot the first picture of the Milky Way I showed you, but this was just a vertical shot because I wanted to kind of get more of the Milky Way into the scene. But as you can see, the clouds were just below us. There were some clouds around the peak here, but luckily we were able to capture the shot. This is just a watchtower, a couple of 100-year-old watchtower from the time of the Knights when they were in Malta. And again, just wanted to get the Milky Way over. This is the one I showed in terms of planning earlier, how to get the shot. This is at Tal Hamria, which is in the west of Malta, well, southwest of Malta near Rendi. It's a natural sea arch. It's no longer accessible on foot, unfortunately. I previously went down here to shoot sunrise. However, last year, a couple of years ago actually, the headland here collapsed and it's no longer accessible on foot. You need to go by boat to be able to get to this arch. It's quite a big arch actually. When you're there, it's probably, I'd say, the top of it must be 8 or 10 meters tall. But again, without a person there for scale, it's hard to tell just how big it is. And this is the most recent shot of the Milky Way from my trip to the Dolomites. Same location that I shot the meteor shower, very close by, but just turned around behind me and there was the Milky Way. There's the light glow there of the light pollution. I just wanted to include. So I'm just going to open up another poll before I move on onto a quick demonstration of post-processing. And just wanted to see kind of what your preferred focal length for night sky photography is. So I've put in 4 options. There's below 20mm, 24, 35, or 50. So I'm just going to launch that poll now. Okay, so I've just closed the poll and we'll see the results. So again, the majority are below 20mm. Obviously, the wider you can go, the more of the night sky you can include in the photo. 24 is definitely a popular focal length. I do actually use 24 a lot myself. I don't have a 35mm lens. Hopefully I'll have one soon, so I'd like to start experimenting with that. Obviously, it completely changes the dynamic of the night photo because you need, especially if you're including foreground, you need to consider where you're going to position your subject. And then a couple of people using 50mm. I don't have a 50mm lens either, but I'd imagine it's definitely interesting to get really good close-ups of particular parts of the Milky Way or the night sky. So thank you very much for that. So I'm just gonna load up Lightroom so we can go through a quick post-processing demonstration. 2 seconds whilst I load that up. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to be post-processing this image and just walking you through step by step what my workflow looks like. So as you can see, we've got two frames here. This is the one I mentioned is next to Blatat al-Melch on a rocky plateau, and there's the heavily weathered cliff face here. This is limestone, very soft rock which gets weathered quite easily. So we've got our sky frame here. If we zoom in, we can see that there's some good detail of the Milky Way. There's obviously some noise because it's a single exposure, 20 seconds at f2.8 and ISO 6400. And then we've got our foreground image here, which we can see is focused on the foreground, much cleaner because we've gone for 4 minutes and ISO 800. So I'll just start going through my workflow for post-processing. The first thing I do is bring down the highlights just to even out the exposure. Colors are definitely quite far off, so generally I want to go around 4,000, 4,100 in terms of color temperature. And I'm going to start to bring up the whites because this is how I can bring out all the detail in the Milky Way core. Now, that looks really bright and it's not going to remain that way, so I'm going to bring down the exposure, but just to show you kind of how you can push the raw file by getting the data you need and then kind of compensating another way. Pushing the whites this much has had an undesirable effect on the image, which I'll explain in a second. I'm just going to open up the shadows here, which will make it easier to blend to the foreground layer later. So pushing the whites has actually changed the colors a little bit, as you can see. So if we remove the whites, it was quite a neutral color. It's now gone more towards the purples. So what we need to do here is just compensate for that. There's also quite a dark corner here on the edge of the photo. So I'm just going to use a graduated filter and lighten that up a little bit just to remove that vignette. Now the lens, the Nikon mirrorless cameras and the lenses have automatic profiles which are inbuilt. You can't even switch them off. So there's no need to put on profile corrections because it's done automatically once you open the image in Lightroom. So that's balanced that out quite a bit. As we can see before and after, it's made the sky look a lot more balanced. Everything does look a bit purple, so I'm going to first move my tint maybe to -4, which makes it look better, but we don't have uniformity in the colors here. This part of the image looks good, but this bit is still a bit purplish, so I'm just going to go on to another graduated filter, add some green, a tiny bit of blue, and bring another graduated filter in by dragging and dropping just to even out those colors. And that way the sky looks a lot more consistent. The colors in it aren't varying too much. Now, one thing that you'll notice is this part of the sky is actually quite bright. And that's because of light pollution nearby, unfortunately. So in the interest of trying to make the sky as consistent as possible, I'm just going to drop the exposure a little, drop the highlights there. And I'm using a radial filter now. Click and drag to make the filter to just kind of darken that down, make it look a bit more natural and hide that that light pollution. The colors of it also need to be arranged because it looks a bit purplish here. So I'm just going to add a bit of green, bit of blue there, so it looks a lot better. So I'm just going to take a quick step back now and see what it looks like compared to where I started from. So if we look at the before and after, obviously the color was completely off, but we can see how much more the Milky Way is standing out now. The colors already look a lot more realistic. The sky doesn't have that harsh gradient. Maybe I could reduce this a tiny bit more, so I'll just add another graduated filter here with a bit of exposure and just bring that up as well. So that looks much better. So pretty happy with this in terms of my sky. What I'll do is, because I'm going to be blending this image in, I want a bit more detail in the sea there. So I'm just going to create another radial filter, but increase the exposure slightly just to bring out a bit more detail. And this is just going to make it easier when I come to match two layers because the other layer was brighter to begin with here. So happy with my sky layer. I'm now going to hold Control and click on that layer and press Sync, check all, and synchronize. And what this does is it copies all the settings over to my foreground layer. I'm not going to be using all the same settings, so I'll be removing the whites, the highlights, and playing with the exposure. I'll also make it a tiny bit cooler and arrange the tint slightly. But as you can see, this is a much cleaner layer. So what I can use in the foreground is a bit of texture here to bring out the detail and the sharpness that there is. And I'd say that I'm pretty much happy with that as a foreground layer. Maybe make it a tiny bit darker. I'm now going to take both images, select them both, right-click, edit in Adobe Photoshop, so that we can merge these two layers together. Unfortunately, you can't merge them in Lightroom, or at least in the version of Lightroom that I have, but in Photoshop we'll be able to merge them. So just gonna open them up. What I should have done was right-click, edit in, and open as layers, but instead I've opened them separately. It's not a problem. All I need to do is select one of them. So I'll select the sky one. I'll press Control A to select it, Control C to copy it, and Control V to paste it. And now I've got them on top of each other. So now you can start to see the two photos we're going to be merging. The top is my sky layer. The bottom is my foreground. So I'm going to click on the sky layer. What I want to do is select the sky so I can make a mask. So I'm just going to use the quick selection tool. I'm going to run around the edge here and let Photoshop figure out where the edge I want is. Now, Photoshop doesn't always get it right, as you can see, so you can hold Alt to go back and remove whatever you don't want selected. And I can zoom in as well, just to be a bit more precise here. Now, even if it doesn't get it spot on, that's not a problem because we can fix the mask later using a brush. But just the closer we can get it with the quick selection, the better. So that looks good enough for now. I'm going to go on select and mask. I'll set a radius of about 5 pixels and click Smart Radius, which just means Photoshop will work a bit harder in trying to find the actual edge of the cliff in this case. And with the marching ants there, the selection, I'm just going to click the new mask layer and it creates a mask. So that's all it took to add the sky into the foreground. What I'm going to do now is do a quick, what I call border patrol, just to make sure the mask was correct. So as you can see here, the Photoshop hasn't quite got this correct. It's missed it out. So I can click on the mask. I can click on my brush and make that brush smaller. I can change the color to white so that I am revealing what there is and just paint in what Photoshop missed out, basically, which is these borders here. See if there's anything else. Quick check. Seems to have done a good job here. The places it generally misses are like really tight corners where kind of it just skips by them. So as long as you're checking the border all around the image, you'd be able to see that it hasn't missed anything out. I'm just going to fix this here because clearly it has missed this part out. I'm going to switch to black here to paint away what I don't want, including these bushes, which were selected when they shouldn't have been, and just paint that in there. So that's the sky replaced. And as you can see, because we matched the colors before we brought them into Photoshop, the colors are very similar. It looks very realistic. It's the same kind of tones throughout the image. The last few steps to bring out detail in the Milky Way are to merge these to a layer. So I've just pressed Control Shift Alt and E to merge them into a new layer. Now, what I like to do at this stage is add a tiny bit of blur, which first of all will help to mitigate some of the noise because it softens the sky slightly, or the image actually slightly. And then I'll be doing star minimization, which is a separate thing. So in terms of radius, when I'm putting the Gaussian blur, I choose usually the same number of megapixels that my camera has. So my camera has a 45 megapixel sensor, so I'll just choose a radius of 45 pixels. And I'm going to then go on Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. I'm just going to go full on the contrast and a tiny bit of brightness there. Now, obviously, the image is completely blurred and looks very wrong and unnatural. So I'm just going to bring this back just maybe 10, 12%, and I'll show you the difference that makes. So if I switch off that layer and I switch it back on, you can see it kind of softens out some of that noise in the image. And the last step is, again, I'll merge to a new layer, Control Shift Alt and E. And this time I'm going to target the stars. So what I want to do is I want to reduce the number of stars in the sky. Now this might sound counterintuitive, but the reason that I'm doing this is that the core of the Milky Way is more prominent and sticks out more. So what I'll be doing is I'll be going select color range. Now I want to target the highlights only, and you can play around with the fuzziness slider and the range until you've pretty much got the core of the Milky Way selected, as in white. So that looks about right. I'll press OK. Now I want to refine that mask, so I'm going to go on select, modify, expand by 1 pixel. You can see it's selecting a bigger area. And once again, select, modify, and now feather by 1 pixel. And the actual filter I'll be using now is other minimum. It's important that this is set to roundness so that it makes the stars round. And also you need to make sure that your that the radius is anywhere between 0.1 and 1 pixel. If you go too big, it just makes everything look unnatural and weird, as you can see. So I generally find about half a pixel is about perfect. So I'll just go for 0.5 and I'll press OK. And we'll see what that's done. I'm just gonna click on Control D to deselect, and you can see what that's done. So if this is with the layer on. With the layer off, there are a lot more stars around, a lot more stars in the sky, but putting that layer on helps to remove some of those stars and makes the Milky Way more prominent. It also brings out the detail in the dust lanes in the Milky Way, and you can start to see more of the color from Antares and Royal Fuci. Obviously, if it's gone too far, you can always bring back the opacity and bring some of those stars back in. I generally go for around 80 or 90% because I like to kind of make sure that the Milky Way is clearly the prominent point of the photo. Once that's done, I'm just going to go and save as, just put in a new file name. I'm saving it as a TIFF, so I have all the information I need in that file, and it will automatically show up again in Lightroom for me. And I can just do some very last minute minor adjustments if I feel the need to. Just waiting for it to load up in Lightroom. Look at Photoshop, it's still saving here. 99%. There we go. So it's loaded up in Lightroom. So if we look at where we've come from, this is the original raw file for the sky. This is the original raw file for the foreground. This is our final result. Much more natural looking colors. It's not too blue. You can at this stage, if you want, try to make the Milky Way pop a bit more, increase the whites, reduce some of the highlights, for example. You can add a bit of dehaze to bring out some more detail in the Milky Way. But at this stage, it's important not to go crazy because you can very easily overdo it. So I'd say that would be what I'd be happy with and call that a shot I'm happy with. So that's my demonstration on editing. Obviously, if I was doing this for a shot myself, I would spend more time on it. Sometimes an edit can take quite a bit longer than that. It just depends on how accurate I want to be with my masking, how accurate I want to be with my colors. But this was purely as a demonstration. So we're just going to jump into Starscapes now as another subject to talk about. I'm just going to prepare the screen whilst I do that. So just bear with me for a second. Okay, brilliant. So Starscapes. Just waiting for the screen to load. There we go. So Starscapes are something that it's a term I've coined myself, I suppose. It's not actually, I don't think I've ever come across the word Starscapes, but it's basically just images with a starry night sky, not specifically the Milky Way. I do like to include particular constellations in images, but generally speaking, it's more of just kind of a starry night sky. I do really enjoy starscapes at the mix between like just after sunset into the night and just before sunrise in the morning, where you start to get the beautiful warm tones in the sky. So part of the sky is still dark and there are stars visible, and obviously the closer you get towards the sunrise, the stars are less visible. So this is, for example, Trecime in the Dolomites. This is the Schweini salt pans in Gozo. Again, just before sunrise, stars still in the sky, a rising crescent moon, which luckily just about reflected in the little pot, in the little salt pan here. And these are the salt pans full of salt. They are quite bluish. It took me a while to figure out that's because they're actually reflecting the blue sky on top of me as opposed to the warmth on the horizon. So at first I thought that my colors were off, but the reality is that they're being white and reflective, they're reflecting the blue sky above. This is a couple of lakes in the Dolomites. Again, just before sunrise, the last few stars being visible in the sky. Probably one of my favorite places in the Dolomites. And an incredible place to shoot. This is called the Pale di San Martino. And again, just the stars in the sky just as the first few colors of sunrise start to appear. This is Trecime de Lavaredo, again in the Dolomites, but from a different angle. So the image of the Milky Way area was shot to the right, where you'd be able to see them head on, all three of them. In this location, they're kind of almost in a line. That's my tent there, set up for scale, just to show how big the place is, and this was shot just after sunset. This is a little sea arch in the south of Malta as well. Again, I was here to shoot the Milky Way originally. Didn't come away with a great shot of the Milky Way, but managed to get this shot I was happy with just before sunrise of the last stars in the sky. This is a really interesting boulder in Maestral Park. It's interesting because this shot is interesting to me because generally when there's a cloudy sky, I wouldn't bother shooting, but because there was such thin high clouds, I took the shot anyway. I thought it added to the feel of the image and just kind of added to the overall feel. This is probably my first proper photography adventure in 2014. I visited Mount Etna, an active volcano, as you can see. And this is probably the first proper night image I shot. You can see constellation Orion here in the sky. That's Orion's belt, that's his bow and arrow, and that's his dagger. And obviously the active Mount Etna with snow on the slopes made for definitely an interesting foreground. This is a cave in the south of Malta called Fisherman's Cave. Again, simple, just a starry sky, no Milky Way or any specific target. Just wanted to kind of get that feeling of being out at night, using artificial light here to really light up the surrounding cave. This is Orion, again, captured in the middle of a thunderstorm last year. Obviously, when we're out chasing storms, we don't generally get very clear skies above us, but this made for a really interesting picture because I got both the thunderstorm and the constellation Orion above it. This is the towering Comino, a little island part of the Maltese archipelago, and there's Pleiades cluster up here, the top right. I shot a star trail from the same vantage point, which I quite like as well. This is Cinque Torri, the 5 towers in the Dolomites. Again, you can see the glow of the light pollution on the horizon, starry night sky, but some really incredible places to visit. And another shot of Trecime. This time it's sunrise with the light coming from behind and the first of the alpenglow lighting up the mountains, but still plenty of stars in the sky. This is what I mentioned earlier. I like to also include constellations sometimes. So this is Soppu Tower in Gozo, but I've also included Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Big Dipper and Little Dipper. I've drawn the outline so you can obviously identify the stars there. And this is just before dawn in May this year. This is in that same trip. This is a very famous boulder, which well, famous with rock climbers anyway. It's called Tower of Power, or they named it Tower of Power. And again, this is constellations highlighted in the image. A complete night shot. This was shot with a half moon, so you can see there are some pretty harsh shadows in places, but obviously that moonlight is what lit up the foreground and balanced it out. This is a girna, which is a traditional stone hut. It's also on the island of Gozo. And again, I've got the Big Dipper and Little Dipper there highlighted. This is that same tower in Comino, this time showing Scorpio, the constellation Scorpio, and Sagittarius. Two interesting constellations which help to find the Milky Way. The Milky Way actually runs through Scorpio's tail. In fact, it would be along this line, but it's not visible because it was just close to sunrise here. And this is a shot from Tuscany with just 2 cypress trees on the horizon. This was shot at 70mm, and the constellation Cassiopeia in the night sky. So that is Starscapes. I'm just going to move on to star trails next. So this is what I mentioned of the tower in Comino. Star trails are basically just taking several shots. So generally I take anywhere between 200 and 400 30-second exposures, one after the other, with as little gap as possible. And what you're effectively doing is capturing the rotation of the Earth. It looks like the stars are moving and streaking across the sky, but it's actually the rotation of the Earth that's being seen there. Very interesting technique. I know it wasn't very popular in terms of the poles there, but there are some compositions which can really work for star trails. This was the Agio window in Gozo. So this is a sea arch which was pretty famous. You might have seen this in Game of Thrones. You might have visited it if you've ever been to Malta or Gozo. Unfortunately, this arch collapsed a couple of years back in a massive storm and is no longer there. This was shot a few months before that. I had the intention of going back to shoot it again, but unfortunately I'll never get that opportunity because the arch is gone. So all you have now is just the cliff face here. There's not even a stack left. It's completely submerged. This is another star trail. This is the type of star trail is referred to as comet, as in the tails of the stars tail off and they become more narrow, so it looks like they're comets. And this is just an abandoned building using as foreground. Another star trail. So when you face north, so this star here is Polaris, the North Star. When you face north, you can get concentric circles in your star trails. When you face in other directions, for example east, like here, the trails go in completely different directions and they're almost straight lines, as you can see. This is the tower in Comino, once again, from a different angle, looking straight up the stairs, using the stairs as leading lines to pull the viewer into the tower and obviously the sky above. And this is the tower in Dueira, so close to the Agio window, just above it. Again, tower with the stars streaking across the sky. This is, I think, a 3.5-hour star trail. Moving on to the moon. So quite a few people said they like to capture the moon. Very interesting subject. You generally use very different lenses to what you would use for the wide angle stuff like the Milky Way and Starscapes. Generally anything from 200 and above is good for the moon. These images are heavily cropped. This is the moon in eclipse. I shot a sequence and you can see the difference here between one part of the eclipse and the other. This is another sequence of the moon in eclipse as well. So this is basically just keeping the camera set up on a tripod, pointing in the same direction. Obviously, you need to know the direction in which the moon is moving across the sky so you can plan for that, and taking a frame every, for example, 10 minutes, and then you can amalgamate those into one single shot in Photoshop, but it shows you the different phases of the moon as it's in eclipse. This is the moonshot I mentioned earlier of the Valletta skyline. The moon set in Tuscany. This is the Cappella Madonna di Vitaleta, which is a very famous chapel in Tuscany. And obviously you've got the traditional Tuscan cypress trees next to it. This is a moon set in Tuscany. So this was shot from about 1.5 kilometers away. It was done using a 300mm lens with a 2x teleconverter, and the image is obviously cropped as well to bring it in, so it just looks much bigger. But having that distance between yourself and your subject, which in this case was the trees, it helps to give that perspective of the moon looking bigger than it actually is. This is the moon during eclipse with Mars as well over Etna, which is known as the Silent City in Malta. And this is a close-up of that, the moon in eclipse and Mars. This is a different view of the sequence, the moon and Mars both rising above Etna. So again, you can see the different phases of the eclipse, the different colors in the moon. And with each shot, there is the moon and Mars. So you can see that they follow the exact same trajectory. And finally, this was an unplanned shot, which is unusual for me, but I was hiking back to the car after sunset and spotted the moon rising alongside the tower. So just took a handheld shot to try and capture the moment. So Comets and Meteors up next. This is the shot I mentioned earlier. So using PhotoPills, you can plan when you want to when the meteor shower is going to be, so you can aim for the peak and obviously hope for the best weather. This is another shot from the same night, a different part of the place, but you can see really interesting foreground, the path climbing up towards the peak, and then obviously this is the core of the Milky Way. Well, not the core of the Milky Way, it's the other side of the Milky Way, which is more towards the northeast in summer. It doesn't have the same color and dust lanes as the core. This is the meteor shower last year in December. I believe it was the Geminids meteor shower. You can see there's Orion here and a couple of fireball meteors which were captured, and the same tower as the one I shot the Milky Way at earlier. And this is the chapel in Dingley. Again, this is a few years old actually, and captured a couple of meteors with the chapel. Comets, all the images I have are of a single comet. Last year, Comet Neowise graced the world. I think after the situation with COVID, everyone was looking forward to a reason to go out and see something spectacular. So this was the first few days of Comet Neowise before sunrise, and this is Verdala Tower in Malta. And then after that, we were shooting it at night. So this is after sunset over the coast of Gozo, and this is the harbor of Imjar. And you can see most of the towns in Gozo here in this picture with Comet Neowise above. With this, you're restricted to shooting very short shutter speeds because you need a long lens. So this was shot at 200mm, and I was usually going for like 1 or 2 second exposures, very high ISO. But the good thing is you can stack the frames just like you could with a Milky Way shot to try and reduce the noise. Same for this one. This was when the meteor looked the clearest. You could clearly see two different tails. Sorry, the comet, not meteor. You can clearly see two different tails and the nucleus with a green glow. And this was just another shot I captured of Comet Neowise whilst working on a workshop for the Milky Way in the other direction. Just set up the camera and let it take a few frames. I'm just going to jump into the Northern Lights as the last subject of night sky photography that I'll be talking about. But just before I do that, I just wanted to open up the last poll, which is what's the main area that you feel you want to improve on your night sky photography? And that's just for me to understand whether it's around the theory, capturing of the images, or post-processing. So I'm going to launch that poll for you now. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. So I'll just share the results on the screen now. So a couple of people feel they need to focus on understanding the theory a bit more. Quite a few people capturing the images, and the majority post-processing the images. So post-processing is definitely the more challenging part than capturing the images. your workflow kind of evolves as you try different things, experiment. There are a lot of really good guides and tutorials, especially on YouTube, for example. Just search for a tutorial on how to edit the Milky Way, and you'll find loads of results there, stuff which is really helpful. But ultimately, you do need to find what works for you as well, because it's not going to be the same for everyone. I mean, I noticed quite a significant difference. I had to change my workflow when I changed from my Nikon D810 to my mirrorless cameras. The raw files were different, which meant I had to process them slightly differently, which is something interesting. I never thought that the files would be any different, but they clearly were. So definitely something to keep in mind. But I'd definitely say stick with it, as in practice is going to make all the difference. You need to invest the time in it, just like you do with photography in general, but post-processing particularly, you need to invest the time to really get to grips with it and understand it. And definitely reach out to resources, use resources that are available. Video guides can be very helpful because you can actually see what's going on, while somebody's editing a photo on screen. So we'll just jump into the last subject, which is Northern Lights. So I've been lucky enough to see the Northern Lights, I think around 12 different occasions, as in 12 different nights. The first time I saw them was in 2017 when I visited Iceland with my partner Christine. We were in Iceland for 2 weeks. We got pretty lucky with the weather, and we saw them on 5 different nights in that trip, or 6. No, I think it was 5 different nights. One of them being a geomagnetic storm, which was absolutely incredible because we got to see the show of our lives. But I'll go through that in a second. So capturing the Northern Lights is very much similar to the challenge. Again, going to be the shutter speeds. If you go for a long shutter speed, because the lights are moving and can be moving pretty quickly, you'll just generally get like a green fuzz across the screen. What you want to do is have short shutter speeds, high ISOs, and as obviously your aperture as wide open as possible to get as much detail as possible. So for example, this is a 4-second shot. If I shot this for 30 seconds, the whole sky would just look green because the aurora was moving around. This is the waterfall Skogafoss in Iceland at night with a thick band of aurora above it. One of probably my favorite Northern Lights photo that I have. This was a 2-second exposure for the sky, and then a 2-minute exposure for the foreground, obviously blended together to make sure I get the ultimate quality. I could use the foreground from the 2-second exposure, but it would look nothing like this because it would be full of noise and there wouldn't be any detail. So that's why I'm always capturing multiple frames with different settings to make sure I can use the best settings for each frame. This is that night that we saw KP7. So this is a selfie at Stokksnes in Iceland. We saw an incredible show. We were shooting from about 10 p.m. The other people I was with all called it quits by 2 a.m. and I remained till 4 a.m. just shooting on my own, just trying to find different compositions because it was an incredible show. The one thing with the aurora is you don't know if the show is going to last for, you don't know if you're going to see them at all to begin with, but if you do see them, you don't know if they're going to be there for a minute, for 10, or for a couple of hours. So you literally need to work fast. Always prioritize capturing the sky frames first, and you can focus on the foreground later. This is the actual first time I shot the Northern Lights. I was scrambling around to find a composition. I found this little bridge and used it to try and act as a leading line to guide the eyes in towards the sky. This is a panorama from Stokksnes. I tried to get the reflection of the mountains in the puddle. It worked, but not an image I'm particularly happy with. As you can see, the sky is very kind of, there's no definition to the green bands. This is because I was shooting a long exposure, longer than I should have been. And this is where I learned the lesson that I need to be shooting shorter exposures, because otherwise I'm just going to get a green fuzz as opposed to these streaks of aurora. This is Pizzerkur, which is an incredible natural rock formation. Looks like a dinosaur or some kind of monster drinking out of the water. This happened to be low tide, so I luckily managed to get the reflection of Kvitzerkur in the image and the northern lights above. Now this is when things really went crazy at Stuxnet. So like I said, we were lucky enough to see a geomagnetic storm, KP6, which is one of the scale runs from obviously 0, where the aurora isn't visible, up until 9, where the aurora is incredibly active. 9 doesn't even happen once a year, if I'm not mistaken. 6 happens maybe 10, 15 nights a year. So to be at this location, which was a location I'd always wanted to shoot the Northern Lights, to happen to be here when it was clear and with that sort of activity was just incredible. This is a 1-second exposure, so you can imagine how bright the lights were to be able to capture all that detail in just 1 second. And then obviously a separate exposure for the foreground. Same location, different shot. The bands of aurora decided to move over to the right, so obviously quickly turned the camera, shot that, and then shot the foreground as well. And probably my second favorite shot of the Northern Lights is this shot from Kirkjufell in Iceland. Incredible bands just above the mountain, almost looks like a volcano erupting. Obviously, there's Kirkjufellsfoss here, which is the waterfall in front of Kirkjufell. This is a very famous location, very famous image. In fact, in the introduction video, there was actually a shot of the Northern Lights from here, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely a favorite with people, an incredible location, but got really lucky with the sky that night. This is the bridge at Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon. Again, just trying to find a composition. I use the cables of the suspension bridge as a leading line to pull you into the sky. Not the best aurora show I've ever seen, but definitely worth taking a picture of. This is in winter in March 2019. As you can see by the snow, just stopped on the middle of the road, an incredible display overhead, and tried to use the road as a leading line. It doesn't really take you towards the aurora, but at that time I was just trying to figure out a composition that I could capture for the image to work. The first and only time I've ever seen purple aurora. Again, this was that same trip. As you can see, it was in winter. This is a really interesting location. It's near the Arch of Dyrhólaey in the south of Iceland, but definitely interesting to see those purple colors because I'd only ever seen green aurora up until that point. And this is the last image I shot from that trip of the aurora. Again, you can see the snow in the foreground. This is just a random mountain I found trying to get the aurora to kind of mirror the shape of the mountain. So that is all of the photos I'm going to run through. Now, for everyone that's attended, if you scan this QR code, you'll be taken to a page where you can input your name, surname, and email address, and I'll be sending you 5 free guides to night photography. So basically, all you need to do is just scan the code. It will take you to my page where you subscribe to the newsletter, and you'll be getting 5 free guides in PDF format. The guides are around composition in night photography, the Northern Lights, the Milky Way, star trails. So there's plenty of information there, and there's also about planning as well. So you'll have the screenshots from PhotoPills there. So I'll just leave this on the screen for a couple of seconds. You just need to scan this with your phone, and it'll take you to the website. As of now, my Mastering Night Sky Photography book has been launched. So this is a book I've been working on for the last 18 months. You've got a list of all the subjects which are covered here in the content. So there's an introduction to night sky photography, understanding twilight, night, full details about composition, planning and equipment, camera settings, techniques, basics of using a tracker, an explanation of foreground and how to capture it, star trails, the Milky Way, the Northern Lights, Starscapes, everything we've discussed today, but in 10 times more detail, obviously. It's around 120 pages long. And because I'm just launching this now, if you scan this QR code, you get a 25% discount on the book by using the code, just typing night into the coupon code on the on my website. I'll just leave that for another minute or so before I move on to the last thing I wanted to mention. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next one, and that is last year during COVID, I worked on creating my first ebook, which was Mastering Landscape Photography. That took a couple of months. I launched that last year. I've now finally released Mastering Night Sky Photography, and you can actually get both of these as a bundle for a discounted price. It's a limited time offer, obviously, but if you are interested in that, having both of those as a bundle will give you a cheaper version. They're both about 120 pages long. They both have over 130 or 40 images, and they're literally guides through everything. The landscape one covers pretty much the same topics but related to landscape. So it's all about composition, planning, making sure that you're focusing on what you need to capture in terms of what your subject is, etc. So that's the end of the presentation. I will now move over to the Q&A. So I'll just be handing back over to Vicente for a minute before we start the questions and answers.
Hi, everyone. Wow, that was really fantastic, Samuel. Thank you so much for that content. We have so many compliments and so many questions already. We're not even finished in the Q&A already, and have so many people already wanting to ask you all these fantastic questions. And
I'll be happy to answer
wow,
them.
really
Thank
incredible.
you.
In an hour and a half to get so much. Yeah, and in an hour and a half to see so much content and so much creative, but also the technical side was just really fascinating. As Samuel himself said, we're now going to go into the Q&A. So the webinar is not over yet. The content portion is, but the webinar itself is not over yet. You will be receiving tomorrow a recording of the webinar as well as the discount code that we also previously mentioned. We also I have one person, Petar, who is asking if you can, Samuel, if you can go back to the QR code with the 5 guides exactly. Yeah. So we'll leave that, Petar, we'll leave that on screen a little bit for you.
Yeah, I'll
exactly.
leave this on screen.
And everyone, I will now open the floodgates to you, Samuel. All of the fans wanting to talk to you. And the last thing I'll say before we go into that, if you enjoyed today's webinar, BenQ is regularly organizing such webinars. You can follow us on the social media that I mentioned before. We're always working with fantastic people just like Samuel, and not just in this topic, but really a variety of topics, whether you're talking about fashion photography, editing, portrait photography, working with models, working at home with natural lighting, food photography. Really runs the full gamut of what you're looking for. And that's just talking about photography. There's a whole other portion of design as well, and it's all free. It's all available to you. So feel free, of course, to follow that. We always have really fascinating things happen. So with that, I will now hand it off to Samuel for the Q&A.
Thank you, Vicente. So I'm just going to start going through the questions that haven't been answered yet. So I'll start with Rob Aber. So I believe Rob is asking around if you can't use a long shutter speed due to light pollution, just use a real-time noise reduction feature on the camera. So I don't use noise reduction in camera. So most modern cameras have a noise reduction feature, but what that does is it basically takes a second shot after you've taken your original shot without the shutter being open with the same setting, so it kind of tries to negate the noise. But generally that takes quite a bit of time, so I prefer to not use noise reduction and deal with it in post-processing. The reality is that you don't want to be in a light polluted area ideally. It's not easy, and it often means having to travel to dark sky places, but that's when you're really going to see the beauty of the night sky and all its detail, when you can get out of the light pollution. So Diego McAuliffe, I assume is in Malta, has asked, so a lens kit like 18-55 1.8 is good. Yeah, any lens which can go down to 1.8 would be fantastic. I mean, even 2.8 is definitely sufficient. However, f1.8 would be a very good lens to use for astro, any type of night photography. In terms of just bear with me for a quick second. Just need to change something on screen. Okay, so I'll just go back to the questions. So how many? Sorry. The question was, which tripod are you using? So I have different tripods for different uses. I use the so currently my favorite tripod is a Sunway photo tripod, which isn't as tall as my Gitzo tripod, but is more sturdy. So it's carbon fiber and it's got 36 millimeter thick legs, very stable, very lightweight. I also have a Gitzo tripod, which I use for work where I need extra height. It goes up to 2.2 meters, so it's much taller than I am, but that's really useful, especially when working on a hill. John Fiat has asked, how many shots do you typically take to get one? So it depends on the image I'm trying to take. If I'm stacking, then I'll be taking 10 or 20 shots for the sky. I'll then take a shot for my foreground. And if, for example, it's a selfie where I'm posing in it myself, then I'll take a separate shot for that. If it's a simple sky and foreground and I'm tracking, I'd have one shot for the sky, one shot for this foreground, and that's it. So 2 shots. But I'm always merging multiple frames. It's never a single shot. So John also asked if I use sodium light filters or any other filters. So I assume you're referring to like light pollution filters. No, I have at times used them. They do help to reduce the yellow glare from sodium lights. They don't break through that and give you more detail, but they do reduce the yellow glow. So they can be helpful if you are stuck in a place where there is, you're surrounded by yellow sodium lights. The size monitor I use, again from John, that's 27-inch, the SW270C. So Harris Stavrinos has said, how do you handle the landscape as the tracker moves with the camera? So as explained, because I shoot 2 different frames, one for the sky and one for the foreground, I'm going to basically, my tracker is on when I'm shooting the sky, but then I switch off the tracker to shoot the foreground, so the camera doesn't move at all. Marek Dvorsky has asked, which tracker are you using? Does it have auto guiding? So the tracker I use is the Move Shoot Move CIFO rotator. It's very small and lightweight. That's why I've chosen that one. It isn't as accurate as bigger, heavier trackers are, but it is enough to get the job done. I chose a lightweight, small tracker purely because I travel often and need to have something which is lightweight and can carry with me easily. Let's find some more questions. So Rob Aber said, can't using a laser pointer to find the North Star be an issue with planes? Yes, it is. In fact, you need to be very careful. In some countries, it's actually illegal to use a laser pointer pointing at the sky, especially anywhere near aircraft. What I do is obviously I take a couple of minutes to make sure there are no planes around before I use it. And you only use it for a couple of seconds. You switch it on, move the camera towards Polaris, and then switch it off again. But yes, it's definitely something to be conscious of. So Philip Ajus has said, you've mentioned a large f-stop on the lens, but did not grab the focal length. So there is no perfect focal length, right? It depends on your composition. It depends on what you want to shoot. I use 24 millimeters a lot because I like the fact that the Milky Way is quite big in the frame and you get a lot of detail out of it. There are compositions where I will shoot with 14 millimeter though, the widest possible, because I want to get more foreground or more sky in the shot. So it just depends on what you want to shoot. Generally, like I said, I use 14 to 24 as the main range. I have a 24 millimeter f1.4 prime from Samyang. I also have a 20mm f1.8 prime from Samyang, and then I've got the Nikon 14-24. Just going to find some more questions. So Francesco Locampos asked about the move, shoot, move tracker. I've already kind of covered it, but he's asking if I'm happy with it, and a lot of people choose other trackers. I chose the MSM purely because it is light and it is small and easy to carry around, especially when traveling. So Rob Aber asked, what impact does using a 6-minute exposure have on the camera? Will it cause the sensor to overheat? Not particularly. I mean, obviously, when shooting at night, the temperature is going to be cooler. Your set temperature will get warm, and you will start to see some hot pixels, but it's not necessarily going to damage the camera. The Nikon mirrorless camera, which I have, actually now, for the first time ever, cameras have always been up to 30 seconds as a maximum shutter speed without an intervalometer. The Nikon actually now lets you go up to 15 minutes in camera without needing an intervalometer. So clearly, they're happy for the sensor to be exposed for that amount of time without any damage. So John asked, do you take 3 shots for exposure blending, or is that an example? So like I covered earlier, it just depends on the image. If it's just tracking it and the foreground, 2 is enough. If it's tracking the sky and the foreground plus a subject like a person in there or a tent, I'll take more shots to make sure I've got the right detail everywhere. So John Fiatz also asked, how much time margin do you have to take these shots? Is it a few minutes or is it not critical? So when you're stacking, you want the Milky Way, you want to shoot as quickly as possible because of the rotation of the Earth, the Milky Way is going to move across the sky. So if you leave a gap between the shots, you're going to end up, it'll be more difficult to align those shots later. So you want to do as quickly as possible. When I'm tracking, for example, I'll shoot the sky, track the sky and shoot for 4 minutes, switch off the tracker and recompose the foreground and just shoot the foreground. So Rob's question here, in regards to how long I leave the light illuminated for when I'm doing a selfie. Generally, it depends how close I am to the camera in terms of how long I leave the light on for. It's generally quite a short time exposure, 1 or 2 seconds. Just because obviously if I go any longer, I'll end up moving and I'll get blurred in the image. So I try to go higher ISO and a short shutter speed. I do sometimes even bracket those to make sure that at least one of the exposures is correct, because it's easier to overexpose when you've got a bright source of light in the foreground. So Mariano Chantar asked if you need a permit to access Barthelme. No, you do not. Obviously, it is the access is via cliffs, so it is not the easiest access, and you just need to be careful to get there, but you don't need a permit. Obviously, as long as you don't pass through anybody's land. Thomas Rife said, which kind of light do you use to illuminate your self-portraits? So I have a little camping light, which is made by Nightcore. It's a rechargeable light, very small. It's used generally inside of, it's a camping light used to put inside the tent, just to give you light inside the tent. I tend to use that because it gives soft light. It's very small, lightweight, and easy to carry. Okay. I'm just going through some more questions. So Dominic Holt has asked what I think about star glow filters for Starscapes. Dominic, I've never tried to use one. I've never come across one myself. I've seen some images and they look interesting, but unfortunately I've never had the opportunity to use one myself just yet. So hopefully I'll get the opportunity to try one relatively soon. I believe Haida should be sending me one in the next couple of weeks. So I'll give that a try, and I'll definitely update my website with my findings, because it does look quite interesting. Okay. So Nikos Georgopoulos asked, is Malta so rocky, or does Sam prefer these locations? I do prefer those locations. Unfortunately, those are the locations which actually have the least light pollution because they're the furthest away from civilization. But yeah, I like to go to these places which are less accessible because there's less chance of finding other people there, and you'll have the dark sky to yourself. Just looking at some more questions. So Juraj Sida asked about star trails, what settings I use. So generally it will be consecutive 30-second exposures, ISO between 400 and 800 depending on the ambient light, and f2.8. Those will be my sky frames. I generally try to shoot anywhere from 200 to 400. I've even shot 600 sometimes. Sky frames, and then obviously shoot the foreground as well separately, so you've got a clean foreground. So Robert Ajus asked about focus. That's a really interesting one. So you're not going to be able to use autofocus in any night photography where you're dealing with pitch black. So focus is done manually. You need to use live view on the camera. You need to zoom in digitally on the screen to a source of light, like for example, a bright star or a distant light source like a building or a ship on the horizon. And then you need to manually adjust the lens until you get it as focused as possible. There are actually products which are used to help ensure you have the right focus, similar to a Buttonov mask. I've actually just received one today. It's called Focus on Stars, so I'm going to be trying that out, and I will again update on my website a review around how I found that. It looks like a fantastic product, so it should be quite interesting to see. So Juraj asked about nightscape panoramas. Yes, so what I'd say is make sure you're comfortable with panoramic technique during the day as a starting point. And then obviously you can start to do it at night. What you just need to do is, because of the distortion from the lens, you want as much overlap as possible on the images to help them match properly when you come to blend them together. So it's really important to get as much as possible overlap. I generally go for like 50% overlap from one frame to the next. So Katie Kiembronowicz asked about artificial light sources. I've already explained I use a camping light. I've seen lume cubes and people using phone torches, but I prefer to use this. It's much softer and gives a better feel. So Nicholas Georgopoulos asked if I've ever done a mosaic of the Milky Way. No, I haven't done. Just to explain, a mosaic is when you take multiple shots with longer focal length, similar to like a panorama, and then stitch them together. No, I'm not really into deep sky photography. I only shoot wide angle night sky photography. Ray has asked how I stack moon photos in post-processing. I don't stack moon photos. My moon shots are all a single frame for the moon, and then obviously the foreground would be separate, but it's just a single shot for the sky when I shoot the moon. So Thomas Bierbaumer asked, how do you work with different ISO settings when you compose your images? Not quite sure what exactly the question is there, but basically when I'm trying to compose the image first, I'll use a very high ISO and take test shots, which are short shutter speed, just so I can see through what the camera is seeing basically, and compose the image. Once I'm happy with my composition, then I'll change the settings I'll be using to capture the sky or the foreground or whatever it is. I'm just looking for any other questions. So the bundle so Joseph Grech asked about the bundle purchase. There isn't a discount code. It is the price is reduced automatically for the next couple of days, and then it'll be gone. So it's a short time offer, basically just a couple of days. So you don't need to put in a code for the bundle. It's just automatically discounted. So just seeing if there are any others. So Brian's asked about what settings used for the Milky Way. So generally, if I'm shooting a single shot or stacking, it would be ISO 6400, 2.8, or f1.8 if the lens allows. And depending on the focal length, if it's 24mm on full frame, I'll be shooting 10 seconds. If it's 14mm on full frame, I'll be shooting 20 seconds. If I'm tracking, it's completely different settings because the ISO comes down to 4 or 800 and my shutter speed goes up to 4 or 6 minutes, for example. Just gonna see if there are any more questions. So Dominic Pfaffenbickler asked what tracker I recommend. Like I said, I use the Move Shoot Move CFO rotator. I have a review about it on my website, so you can find the details there. You can read through what, how I've used it. I continue to use it because it's a great product. So there's also a discount code there if you want to order it through the link. So Tomas McRae has asked if I prefer the 500 rule or MPF. The real answer is neither. I found the 500 rule to be inaccurate and the NPF rule is quite complex to figure out. So I just take a test shot, look at the screen. If the stars are trailing, I'll go a bit shorter on shutter speed. Generally though, 14mm I shoot 20 seconds, 24mm I shoot 10 seconds. Maggie's asked which is the best file type to save in. I tend to save in TIFF. I find they're smaller and easier to manage than PSDs. Horia Bogdan asked if I've only seen the Northern Lights in Iceland. Yes, unfortunately only in Iceland. Hopefully in the near future I can travel to Norway and see the Northern Lights in Norway as well. Adrian Zamfir asked if I use any filters. I do use light pollution filters when I am in a heavily light polluted area. But as you can see from my pictures, most of the time I'm out in the wild, so that isn't really an issue. I don't use a CPL because at night you want to get as much light in as possible. So you wouldn't want to use a polarizing filter, which can drop the amount of light coming into the sensor. Catalina has asked about storm photography. I'm not quite sure what exactly the question is, but yes, when there is the opportunity, I do go storm chasing and try to capture lightning. It's generally pretty easy for settings. You're going to want a 30-second shutter speed. You'll change your aperture depending on how close or far the lighting is and your ISO just to avoid overexposing. So there's no fixed settings other than 30-second shutter speed because you have to adjust the ISO and the aperture based on how close the storm is to you. So Thomas Borges asked about the Samyang 40mm lens. I've never tried the autofocus version. That being said, you can switch off autofocus from the camera itself. So I would imagine that it shouldn't be an issue using it in manual focus, but I haven't used it myself, so I wouldn't be able to give a definite answer on that. Okay. So Nikola Zivonovich has asked which program I use for stacking. I do the few times I stack, I use Photoshop. There's a lot of other software. If you use a Mac, there is Starry Landscape Stacker, which I've heard is very good. You can also use Sequator for Windows. It's free of charge. But I just use Photoshop. I don't stack very often. Generally, I use a track. So Luisa Silva has asked if I do any exhibitions and managed to sell prints. I haven't had an exhibition recently. Obviously with COVID, it's not been the ideal thing for people meeting in a closed place. However, I do sell prints, yes, through my website. It's not something which is continuous, but every now and then I do sell a couple of prints. Petar Milev has asked how long have I been doing night sky photography? So probably about 6 or 7 years. It started through camping. I used to go camping very often. I still do. I really enjoy camping. And obviously when you're there for the night, it gave me the perfect excuse to play around and experiment with the camera and try different things. Pedro Almeida asked about using an app to the location of the comets. Yes, comets you can find, at least NEO-wise, was updated on, I'm trying to remember what the what the software is called. Just give me 2 seconds and I'll check. And there's a particular software which basically shows you the night sky. Just going to see if I can find it. I've completely forgotten the name. I apologize. If you just Google though, an app I mean, PhotoPills is brilliant for everything else. So you can use PhotoPills for the sunrise, sunset, moonrise, moonset, the Milky Way, the meteor shower. I don't believe they had updated the Comet Neowise on it. However, I had found the details of where Comet Neowise was found through this software I've mentioned. Just bear with me for a second. Let me try and see if I can get it. Yep, Stellarium, that's it. Thank you, Brian. So Brian's just said he uses Stellarium, and that is the software. Thank you, Marek Dvorsky, as well, for confirming that. Yeah, so Stellarium is a free software you can download, and you can set date, time, and your location, and it will show you the night sky. And you can find any targets you want by searching for them. And last question, Nicolas Ivanovic asked, can you do masking in Lightroom? You can. It is different in Lightroom to Photoshop. Quite different, in fact. Photoshop is much more advanced when it comes to masking, but you can still use it in Lightroom. Using the brush, you can paint what you want, and then you can remove that using auto mask. That's all the time we have today. Thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate you joining us and listening to me share my stories and share my work with you. If you do want to learn more about night sky photography or landscape photography, please check out my ebooks on my website. And also, if you're really considering taking photography seriously, then make sure you invest in the right equipment, and a monitor, a proper photography monitor like the BenQ range is something I'd definitely recommend. I can't imagine going back to using a regular monitor now that now that I've been using the SW270C for 2 years. So just over to Vicente now.
Yes, thank you again, Samuel. We're getting so many lovely comments, so many thank yous from everyone. We're the ones who say thank you for coming. As I said, this was really a labor of love from our part, from Samuel, for taking so much time to really prepare this meticulously, to really make the best webinar for you. And I think really in such a short time span, just 2 hours to get so much content and so much knowledge is really fantastic. So as I said before, the webinar recording will be sent to you along with the discount code that you're seeing right now in front of you, which is valid for 1 month for Malta and for Europe. And I encourage you, of course, to follow Samuel. He also regularly gives workshops and has tons of content, and just to follow his work, which is just so fantastic. And you can also follow us on BenQ to also always stay up to date on webinars, just like the one that you're attending right now. These happen on a very regular basis, and always with incredible people just like Samuel, who come from all different walks of life and different countries, but who have just a wealth of knowledge to share and so much to teach and so much to share with us. So again, on behalf of BenQ, I say thank you to Samuel again, once again, and I say thank you to all of you for joining us, and we hope to see you at a future event. Bye-bye.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Bye.